Hello and welcome to our Dinesh Guarda Cities ABC Open Business Council series. So I'm very excited about a new interview and as well a very wealth experience and personality that we're going to be talking today. And as some notes that I have here, so we're going to be talking today with Francesca Sanderson, that is the Director of Arts Programs and Investment at Nesta, which is we're going to be talking about is one of the biggest organizations in the UK for creative industries and all the relationship with culture, arts, and now as well with investment in different areas. And Francesca has a fantastic background. I was saying this before speaking with her, but it's quite unique. Someone that managed to have both a background in equities and ethical equities fund of JP Morgan, which of course is a very big corporate global organization, and that she's been working for 8 years and following up with an MA in philosophy and maths, which is another fantastic mix, and the periodic work in charity administration and fundraising. And after this, Francesca took a career break during which she traveled around Europe and then settled for living off-grid in Portugal, which is actually my country home, although I've been out of the country for 20 years, and with her family. On her return, she started working with Big Society Capital as an investment director, where she worked on a wide variety of social investment deals and research into social pensions. So Francesca Sanderson, that is also known as Fran, and I'll let her know how she wants to be asked, is also treasurer of Cambridge House, a settlement in Walworth, South London, and has worked closely with the Unlimited, I think she will explain better the way to spell it, the Foundation for Social Entrepreneurs in a non-executive capacity. And she's a passionate about literature and creative writing and is a member of the National Academy of Writing, which is another area that I love. And she also enjoys music, theater, and dance, and an enthusiastic observer. So I welcome Francesca. I think that's a fantastic CV, and as well a wealth of experience and completely different things, which I think is wonderful, especially in this world that we're living in. So welcome to our series, Francesca. I'm
Thank
quite
you very
excited to
much,
have you.
Denise. Yeah, I'm very excited to be here. I said to you earlier that I looked at some of your profile people and your previous interviewees, and I feel very humble to be in their company. So thank you very much for inviting me on.
No, well, I am humble as well. So because I think for me, every person is a wealth of experience and it's a universe in itself. But you are really amazing from all this background. So I have a lot of questions, and of course, I want to touch, of course, about the purpose of this interview. That is the fact that Nesta, Fundación Compromiso, and Upstart Collab are launching the Creativity, Culture, and Capital Impact Investing in the Global Creative Economy, which is one of the areas of my work and all the team that is behind this YouTube podcast series. But I want to start with the background. So I think someone that has this kind of complexity and wealth of background is quite amazing. And I think especially anyone listening to us around the world, we have a young audience all over the planet, from India to Egypt to Turkey to Asia, Malaysia, and Africa. Actually, I just did a new partnership with 10,000 social entrepreneurs in Africa. So they are, I'm sure, very excited to listen from you. But as well, I'm particularly interested in your background that touch one of the biggest investment firms in the world, probably the biggest, at least in terms of name, but as well with a mix of very high profile equity investment and fund mixed with philosophy and maths, charity, social impact, and creativity. So I love this. So how did you start this wonderful journey, and a bit probably of your background, family background, and education?
Um, okay, well, I think I've always had, I've always found maths easy. So I've always had kind of a facility with maths, and I think that the arts and mathematics dichotomy kind of raised its head probably first at deciding what to do at university. So I was really deciding whether to do English because I was so passionate about writing, or maths because I knew I could get a good degree. And I really enjoyed maths as well. And then I kind of hit upon, I didn't want to, so my thinking, obviously I'm 17, so it wasn't the most deep thinking I've done, I think. But I thought, well, if I go to university to read English, maybe reading will become mature rather than enjoyable thing. So I'll go and do maths as well, but I don't want to just do maths. So I'll balance that out with the sort of humanity-ish subject. So I chose philosophy, which is interesting because obviously it is quite abstract as well. And when you study maths with philosophy, you do end up going down a kind of logic, mathematical logic, philosophy of science, philosophy of mathematics route. So a lot of the moral philosophy and that kind of thing, I sort of, and the modern continental philosophy, that might be more commonly associated with philosophy. I was going down a bit more of an abstract route. So it was like, the thing I would think in retrospect about my degree was it was very abstract, and I think a lot of my connection with the world has come later. I would say I was very abstract late teenager and young professional, and I think partly that's it was really interesting to go into JP Morgan, which was it was very much a financial decision. I came out of university with a master's degree and enormous debts, and I thought, well, what I really want to do is write novels, so I've got to pay off these debts first. So the most efficient way to do that would be to work in a high-paid job. And then, of course, once I actually started work at Fleming's. And then before I started, it was taken over by Chase Manhattan. And then just after I started, they merged with JP Morgan. So, in 1 month of my career, I'd gone from a small Scottish investment bank to a huge multinational US based consolidated bank. I can't remember what you called now. So that was really interesting, and I started that with very little knowledge of the workings of the world, and it's quite a thing to be at 22 given this position of responsibility, and going to meet CEOs of huge corporations, and it's kind of astonishing to me now that I did that at such a young age.
Before we go more to, of course, the corporate background, but just about education, because you study in you mentioned Scotland, so I'm sure from Scotland. I didn't ask that, but I think it's an interesting background I would like to do. But I would like to touch the education, because especially in creative industries, there's a dichotomy, and even me when I studied, which I had a very chaotic background. I studied actually literature and languages, and then I mixed with film and music, and then I came hardcore to technology and media. But what I understood, and then to finance, which is as well a bit similar to you, but what I found out was that all this background is very divisive. So you have the people in art, you have the people in sciences, and the people in business, and the people in finance. So and normally these worlds don't touch each other. For instance, I remember that when I was working in investment bank, I was always putting my creative side or the literature side on the side. But I think especially you being on Nesta, and I think this wealth of background is very important for people listening to us, because of course, if you look at AI, most of the jobs are being automated as we speak. So I just want to touch this kind of from the studies, like you mentioned, math and the philosophy in different areas, but as well the nuances, because the devil's on details, and especially people listening to us and people in the creative industries, which is an industry that I've been studying for 20 years. I feel for most of these people, because they're very, especially with COVID, they've been very affected. And at the same time, there's so much opportunities, but people sometimes forget to use the tools we have at our disposal. But well, I'll go to that in another question. Just one of this kind of, how do you bridge from all this background to end up in investment banking and these areas?
Well, so there's several answers and several kind of sequential parts to that question. I think so when I went to work in investment bank, I really thought, okay, I'm going to put my creativity to the side. That's going to be something I do. And it was very binary in my mind. So in the evenings, I was studying a film writing course, but at work, I was obviously, and actually one of the things that I worried about was doing a lot of writing with investment reports and stuff, was that my writing would lose, become more of a kind of technical writing skill. And so I was keen to carry on with the creative writing in the background, but of course these things interact with each other, and maybe I think I've learned over the years to see myself as much more of a whole individual rather than these separate angles of myself that I could keep apart. Actually, I do more music than creative writing. I'm not a good musician at all, but I find music is just a fantastic way to get into that flow state. I love the progress of working. I like the mathematical elements of transposition. I'm starting to work with digital audio workstation software and that kind of stuff, mainly because my children are very cool and they do lots of music and recording, and I want to try and keep up with them. So I think and I find that's really helpful. It's obviously helpful in my work now because I'm working in the creative sector, and with all these areas where I'm a dilettante, but I'm such a massive fan, and I have huge respect for anyone who has developed any kind of creative skill to the levels I aspire to. And I think that that kind of humility is super helpful in the role I have now. I feel like I'm jumping around a bit, but where I'm interacting with artists as a sort of as a bridge to the business community. So I'll be talking to arts organizations, who as you know, are very rarely staffed or run by non-arty people. All of the people I talk to pretty much are artists, and I'm working with them. And I want to, I think it's very helpful to be going in there as a person who's representative of the money and the business world, and trying to balance this idea perhaps that, okay, well maybe, and this is very reductive view, and maybe we can help you on the business side and thinking about your business case and developing a resilient and a resourceful business model, and doing that without that kind of implicit superiority. I'm the money person, because actually, what these guys do is something that I respect so hugely, and I don't feel like I'm coming in there as someone who has this overarching superseding power, which is the ability to do some spreadsheets and some business analysis. So I think that's really helpful in terms of how I interact with people, and having this awe and excitement for being able to for having been able to move my career from kind of the drier areas of analyzing financial services and analyzing packaging companies to actually working with artists and creatives, and using the skills that I thought I was just building up as a corollary to earning enough money to be able to pursue a creative career myself. I feel like I've gone around the house with that answer.
No, amazing. But I think it's very important, this area, because I think this is one of the biggest challenges we have in our society. And I want to touch that in the context of the new initiative that you are doing, because what I feel is that, and I want to go back right now to your background in JP Morgan and investment, because what I feel that moment is that there's so much tools available, but people use them mostly for self-destruction or stupid things. And I think this creates a huge problem, especially in the creative industries. That is, they become very fundamentalistic and very self-absorbed. That's part of the technology we're using, and a lot of different things. So that's why I want to cut these parts and go through this, because I think even the way you speak is your wealth of experiences because of your curiosity towards doing different things. And I think everyone has this, but sometimes people are taught in universities or schools, okay, just do this exceptional well, but forget the rest. And I think that wealth of experience is super valuable, because, for instance, I have a challenge, for instance, in my team that I'm probably the oldest, me and one or two more people, and all the young people below me that are terrible in social media, and it gets me worried, because I'm sure they spend, all of them, 5 hours per day in social media, but they are terrible to promote themselves, to use it for business. And this is where the business is. So if you're an artist, you don't know how to use social media, you have a problem. And this starts a bit, of course, if you go to JP Morgan, even JP Morgan is on social media and use creativity to sell their products. So it's a paradox, but I want to touch this because I think your experience is very important for anyone listening to us around the world. So can you tell us about the background with JP Morgan and before in the investment world, and the equity, and as well the ethical fund and investment, because that's an area that right now is starting to be quite at least a buzzword, but from the theory to the practice, there's a lot of work to be done. And I know that is what you are actually right now trying to do with the new initiative of Nesta.
Sure. So, like I say, I was so fortunate to get that job at JP Morgan. As a young person, I was, I didn't work very hard in that job. I think I felt quite entitled in that job. I felt a bit, I took for granted the opportunities I had. I did have to work very hard for my CFA exam that I did, but I was not, I struggled to engage with it. But what was really interesting was I think I felt to a certain extent that was going to define me, and I was resistant to that. So I was kind of, most of my friends were creatives or artists or teachers, or, I didn't have many friends who were in the investment banking world. So I was trying to distance myself from it in a way. And I think that probably as a personality within the bank, I wasn't very engaged with all of the work, but actually I found it really fascinating. for lots of reasons. I found it fascinating that I was deemed to be worthy of doing this business analysis in a way that I didn't really think I was. So I suppose, so I'm coming around to, I guess it's a question of identity. In the job, I mean, I had the most amazing opportunities. So I started off in high yield credit, and I went into my first internship in 1999, and I was on a actually this was for Abbey National, which at the time was a high street bank in the UK, which had developed underneath it really quite a large fixed income, essentially trading desk stroke hedge fund. And I sat down there on the first day on this trading floor, and someone said, "Oh, can you build a model for these mortgage-backed securities?" And I had absolutely no idea what anyone was talking about. So I started. I actually think it was pre-Google. I think I might have gone on Ask Jeeves, and then I sort of got some background material, and I turned to the trader next to me and I said, "What's a bond?" And they were like, "Oh my God, what have we landed here? This idiot 21-year-old." So, but obviously that was a fascinating place to be. And so through that and kind of learning from scratch how to build a defaults model for a mortgage-backed securities portfolio, I then, had this background in fixed income, having done that for 3 months. So when I went to Flemings and I got a job on the high yield credit desk, and this was in 2000. So this was, a really interesting place to be. The bubble was just bursting. My colleagues in equity had a pretty torrid time, and that was coming for me, of course, with the summer of Enron and WorldCom in 2002, by which time I was working in New York as part of the merger. So I'd been sent over to New York for a year from my professional development, and that was just a fascinating time. And it was really to see it's a very interesting place to learn about upside and downside on a fixed income desk. And it, coming in there as a relatively green person, you could look at a portfolio and go, wow, this is just, with credit spreads this tight, this is just an all downside scenario here. I don't know, I was sure all of this, but I've got an index. And then the other angle of that was that obviously then we started having a restructuring in the team, and that became from somewhere I'd sort of I'd tolerated working to being quite a hostile and painful environment to be in. And with all respect to, I don't suppose any of them will be watching this, but I thought, I don't like these people, I don't want to be working with these people, I'm not sure that my future is here. So I went back to London, which had been planned all along, and I got a job with another firm, but JP Morgan made a counteroffer, and then I moved over to the global equities desk, which was interesting. That was in kind of tone, and it's very important to me, the culture of the teams that I work in, which we'll probably get onto later in Nesta. It was actually a sort of quite traditional. They were much more of a Flemings desk. They'd had roots in Hong Kong. It was more the private client side of the business, but it was growing up to big portfolios, and they'd had strong performance. And then by that stage, we were running $50 billion of assets within a team of about 10 to 12 people. So it was quite it was a high performing team. There was lots of support. There was lots of fun. I really enjoyed that. But to me, I was beginning to feel more strongly, I don't know that this is what I want my life to be about. We were an index tracker, more or less. So when you're going home and, getting paid a lot of money by this stage, certainly compared to my friends, and thinking, but what am I actually doing? My partner was an architect. He was designing buildings and civic infrastructure. I was, and I felt like I'm just, reading all the stuff and ultimately making 2 or 3 basis points difference to somebody's pension fund. That what is my purpose in the world? And then this ethical fund that we managed on the desk came up, needed a discrete manager, so they asked me to manage that, and I thought, this is much more what I'd like to be doing. I want to be thinking about how, really systems thinking, how can this money that we manage is basically the driving force of all the decisions, the biggest decisions in the world, as far as I can see. So if we can get intention behind that money, then that to me is a really exciting prospect. And this is in 2003, 2004. And the sort of the unfortunate circumstance, I don't blame anyone for this, was that was an 80 million pound fund and a $50 billion desk, and I was also the financials analyst for the desk. So I was making decisions on $5 billion of capital or recommendations on that. So it just couldn't really be, the phrase it's not a good use of your time would often come up if I said I'd like to look more into how we do this ethical screening. I'd like to visit it was really a negative screening product. So we had an organization in Cheltenham which we outsourced the ethical decisions to. And I wanted to do some more work with them and kind of get into the theory behind it and understand why certain organizations were screened out and weren't. And it wasn't something I was able to devote as much of my time as I would have liked to towards in that context. And I think that probably was, one of the many reasons, including family development and that kind of thing, but why I left in the end. So really it was an inability in that context to devote more of my energy, more of my intellectual energy, more of my emotional energy towards that kind of ethical ESG part of what it was we were doing. I wasn't able to go out marketing for it, for example. It was a closed fund structure, so it wasn't something that I could grow within the team that I sat in. But it was really interesting to me, and I thought, okay, if I've got a future investment, this is the future that I would like to pursue. But then obviously there was a gap before that started happening, which involved living without a bathroom for 2 years in Portugal.
Wow, that was a radical decision. It's
Yeah.
wonderful. So I want to touch, so that's quite impressive as well. And I think especially, like you mentioned, that you form yourself within big organizations, you learn, and as well, I think it's interesting to make a parallel between your career and as well all the developments around the ESG investment, because you start creating mostly in massive organizations like that, and as well in the equity industries, because they start understanding that if you have a toxic portfolio, it's probably not good for the shareholders and things like that, which is kind of very common sense, but in the world of investment is a bit of sometimes schizophrenic. Because I have a parallel story on that level. So I want to go, so how did you end up in Nesta, and what is Nesta for people listening to us that never heard about it?
Okay, so felt like complete happenstance. It was very fortunate. I just happened to see the job, and I talked about, I think you talked about in my CV that I'd worked for a charity. So in my all of my summer breaks from university to earn money, I worked in a charity in London, and I found there were lots of observations I'd made about the charity sector and thinking about how actually it's very difficult. And again, we're talking 25 years ago now, but it's very difficult to do the financial management to run things efficiently when you don't have a predictable income. So I thought one thing I'd like to do is to help sort of on a charity consultancy side. And then I came across this organization, New Philanthropy Capital, who were working as a sort of at the time, and they're now more of a consultant, but at the time it had been a dual purpose vision. One would be to like find the what we call effective philanthropy now, to find the charities who were really delivering bang for their buck in terms of philanthropy, and then to match those up with philanthropists. So I had a real interest in this, and then I looked at this job at Big Society Capital, and that was talking about, so Ronnie Cohen, who wrote the foreword for the report, had helped set that up as part of the social investment task force, and it was really amazing pioneering piece of policy work and organization design. So I went to work there. Was very fortunate to get that job, and I think the background in charity, again, there's so much good luck in my career. I can't take credit for that much of it. I'd had the background in charity and the background in investment. So I took that job, really interesting. You know, I'd been so institutionalized at JP Morgan to an extent I didn't even really understand. And suddenly I was at this organization with 7 people and we had absolutely no idea what we were doing. But it was completely different. But one of the first organizations that I spoke to about receiving Big Society Capital investment was Nesta. And I went to the Nesta offices probably in my first month at Big Society Capital. So this is the January 2012, and I was completely bowled over. I thought it was the coolest place I'd ever seen. Everybody I met was so intelligent, you know, all of the stuff. I had all these Nesta research reports around, and I wasn't, you know, I talked about being a bit unaware of the world when I was at JP Morgan. I didn't really have a sort of solid knowledge of the public sector and the private sector, even slightly embarrassing to admit. And so the idea of a quango or an arm's length, a non-departmental public body, was not something I'd really spent any time thinking about. So I looked into Nesta and I was working on the investment proposal, and I thought, wow, this is so incredible. You know, it had been set up in 1998 as the National Endowment for Science, Technology and the Arts. And it's really at its heart, it supports interdisciplinary innovation for the public good. So it's thinking about, you know, around the edges of those 4 disciplines, 3 disciplines, science, technology and the arts, but it's also overlaying a social purpose to that. Subsequent to then, it span out as an independent charity, so managed to get an endowment, which I think at the time was £250 million from the Millennium Awards Trust. So that's part of the UK National Lottery, and an amazing CEO who was my CEO for most of my life at Nesta so far, Jeff Mulgan, really incredible, inspiring man. He was running it, and we had become this sort of, you know, really interesting think tank, experimental funder, trying to scale initiatives that, so I'm saying we, at this point, of course, I didn't work for Nesta. I was just gone into the office, thought, what is this amazingly cool place? And who are these amazingly brilliant people? So that's where Nesta was at that time. The conversation I was having with Big Society Capital was about Big Society Capital funding an investment fund around education, health, and another theme. It was 9 years ago now. And at the same time, so Nesta had done all this work in the creative industries, which at the time, and as part of that investment proposal, I wasn't really aware of. I was talking to them much more about the impact, the impact ventures that they were working on. But in 2 years later, I went to work for Esme Fairbairn Foundation, which is a big private foundation, which was started from M&G Investments. And they, again, have been an absolute trailblazer. I think nothing, the UK social investment or impact investment scene certainly wouldn't be what it was without Esme Fairbairn Foundation, who've been doing this for a really long time. They you know, before Big Society Capital was even set up, they had put aside a proportion of their endowment to devote to social impact investments, which essentially was looking at, you know, how can we use our capital more inventively to support organizations, but very organization driven. So, you know, it's of course it's a combination, but I think the primary motive for them was how can we support our organizations better with this capital? It wasn't how can we support organizations and get this capital back. It was more, how can we structure this to be more supportive for an organization, to promote resilience, to provide scaling opportunities. So I went to work for, as a secondment, Caroline Mason, who is, you know, one of the most amazing people in the world. She had been a colleague of mine at Big Society Capital before she took over Esme Fairbairn. So I went over there when she started for a 6-month secondment. And as part of that secondment, I started working on a proposal for something at the time, which was called the Arts Ventures Fund. So hooray, I'm now, you know, in the dream Big Society Capital job, but I'm also working in a charitable foundation, which is amazing. I'm looking at grants funding, and I'm working in the arts. So like I said before, here is my here's all the good luck in my career. And so that the proposal had been set up by an interested an interested group, an advisory board, I suppose, at that stage. And it was the Arts Council England, it was Esme Fairbairn Foundation, and Nesta were involved in that again. So I'm kind of, I'm touching back again with Nesta in my career. And that was more the work of Hassan Bakshi. So Hassan, who you'll probably be aware of, is a real trailblazer in cultural economics, the field of cultural economics, and thinking about how to look at the creative industries as an economist and position the creative industries in the most advantageous place policy-wise. So again, leaping around a bit, now Hassan is running something called the Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Centre out of Nesta. Going back to 2014, at this time, Hassan had written a paper called The New Art of Finance, which was thinking about what's the future for funding arts organisations, how can we look at business model and funding innovation. So here I am, I'm working at Esme Fairbairn, I'm back at Nesta, and we're building this proposal for a fund. Caroline Mason comes over to me and says, "Oh, Fran, can you just do a tiny spreadsheet?" If you've worked in investment banking, you probably know where this is going. Can you just do a tiny little spreadsheet just to illustrate this thing for me? So probably 3 months later, we have this huge, slightly cumbersome spreadsheet, which works as the sort of fulcrum. And we also had a brilliant consultant, Kate Markey, working on it. And we managed to get this fund approved by all parties. So we've got approval for £7 million to be working as an investment fund into arts and cultural organisations. So this has been really fun. I've had a great time. I've learned a lot about the Arts Council. I've had a great time at Esme Fairbairn. I go back to Big Society Capital after my secondment. And then I get, and honestly, I hadn't thought about this the whole way through, because I assumed that they would want a fund manager who was much more grounded in the arts. But I got this phone call from Matt Mead at Nesta saying, "Oh, would you come and run the fund for us?" So then again, this amazing good fortune. Now I've suddenly managed to land myself a job at Nesta, this place that 3 years ago I had walked into and thought, "Wow, this is amazing. I would love to work here." And the first person really that I meet is Hassan, who is an incredibly inspiring person, and I get to work with Jeff, and just a completely extraordinary, a wonderful working culture. And I think it's very hard to imagine finding anywhere as stimulating as Nesta to work, but of course that's I'm sure there are lots of other places just as stimulating as Nesta, but it really is tremendous good fortune, never boring, often frustrating, but it's absolutely fascinating, and certainly keeps you on your intellectual toes, and promotes humility, because the sheer intellectual firepower, sparkiness, creativity of the people I've worked with at Nesta has been completely inspiring.
Wonderful. So Nesta is in a sense an innovation foundation, and is probably the most well-connected organization, especially in the UK, around innovation and creativity. I think now is more innovation, but before was creativity industries and arts and culture. So this is an industry that is in a very big, I wouldn't say crisis, because there's fantastic things happening, but the UK has been kind of, especially in the 90s and 2000s, the kind of global creative think tank, we can say that way, because of all the things happening in the music industry, in the arts, in the architecture and everything else. Now I think Brexit has been damaged quite a lot, the brand, and I don't know how he's going to get out of here, to be honest, being based in London. But at the same time, there's always opportunities with the crisis, and of course we are among massive dual crisis. That one is the technological crisis that is affecting everything that is happening in terms of innovation, but at the same time the crisis of COVID and other things. So from an innovation perspective, and of course now you being one of the responsible for Nesta, how do you see the innovation, especially in this kind of very complex bridge between advanced technology, the fourth industrial revolution, all the disruptive technology that comes out of that, and especially in the paradoxes of most of these disruption technologies is actually using creativity to disrupt our own lifestyles and things like that. But at the same time, you cannot do anything without innovation. So even the Apples that are like $2 trillion business, and is actually more cash flow than most of the countries in the world, is actually looking at creatives to drive their economy. If you look Amazon as well, where we have the founder that made $20 billion in one day, and you have as well Amazon Prime that is all about creative industries. If you go to all the different, so it's a bit of a paradox that even the likes, for instance, Ray Dalio, which is an interesting example, that is of course one of the legendary hedge fund managers, that is actually using creative industries. If you look at this social media profile, is amazing. The work it is doing using video, illustration, and all these things. So I want to touch this core because I think it's a massive. If you talk with the artist world, they are desperate, and I know that I feel the pain, and there's a lot of communities that are even worse, but even the musicians, and there was a lot of things. So, but of course, then you have innovation. There's all these social, digital technology capacities, but there's a divorce between all of this. But innovation is a interstice between all of this. So I would like to see how Nesta and how your work is doing before we go then to the project, which is particularly interesting. That is the creativity, culture, and capital.
Well, yeah, I've got a lot to say on this topic. I mean, my personal view, I'll start with my personal view, is that we are at risk of, terminal underinvestment in our creative industries at the public level here. If you look at the 1.6 billion pound, and this is a UK based opinion, obviously, and you think about dividing that between even the freelancers who are working in the creative industries, I think it turns out at £1,000 each or something. And for me, this is the crux of it is the creative industries have relied on goodwill for a really long time, in so many ways, and there are we're talking about the extraordinary skills that creatives have earlier, and those are built up over hours and years of dedication. So if you take musicians, for example, you've got a musician, and this is pre-COVID even, getting paid for a gig. They don't get paid for the practice they have to do. They don't get paid for the instruments they've had to buy. They don't get paid for the years of investment they've done in their own skills. So I think that we were already criminally underinvesting in our artists and creatives prior to this. And I think the two things that have emerged to threaten that even more are obviously the COVID pandemic, which has decimated, income from performance. There are some tiny mitigants, but they are tiny. On the whole, creatives have seen a collapse in their income, but we're hoping that obviously that will relieve at some stage, when we have some more positive news about vaccinations and infection rates, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But the other big force that's emerging is exactly what you talk about, and it's about power distribution. And I think that the revolutions and the disruptions in the way that we consume culture are creating a really perilous dynamic around power and commissioning. And you see this a little bit with and it's very pervasive. It goes right to the heart of content and how things are made and why things are made and what things are made for, and risk taking. If you look at Michaela Cole, I May Destroy You, I know that she turned down I think £1 million, I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but I think £1 million offer from Netflix to make that in favor of the BBC, specifically around the creative control. And that was an extraordinarily brave and strong thing of her to do. And she maybe was in a stage of her career, I'm sure it wasn't an easy thing to do, but where she felt enabled to do that. Lots of artists won't feel enabled to do that, and it won't be such a big ticket thing. And I fear that we're almost back. The arts have always been in challenging situations around power dynamics, right from the Medicis and the patronage model to public subsidy. And I think the Arts Council in England is obviously aware that when you have a body like that, it's wonderful, and we couldn't do anything without we couldn't be without our Arts Council. But creating an organization like that does give you power dynamic challenges in itself. So I think what's frustrating to me a little bit is that we have, we have the technology now to have a more distributed power model in the arts. And I don't know where the will to develop that comes from. I know that Imogen Heap has been doing some really exciting stuff with her Creative Passport around rights and, keeping rights data within a digital asset of an artwork. So I can't say that I understand that completely, but some development is happening. But Imogen's had to support that, I think, with her own money. There is, we're doing an amazing project with the Royal Shakespeare Company around Audiences of the Future, which is funded by Innovate UK. So there are agencies that are really thinking about how to enable creative risk taking, because the other issue, and this again sort of harks somewhat back but in a different way to the patronage model, when you had a patron, you were at the behest of your patron in terms of what you created. If you're and I am impressed with a lot of the content that's being made by the big platforms, so I'm not wedded to this view in principle, but if you're a commercial organization and you're driven by the need to make sales, then we have to wonder about where the risk taking is going to come from. Who's going to make the the Rites of Spring, or the stuff that absolutely crashes because people don't understand it when it first lands, and then 50 years later that becomes a seminal moment in the development of art. So that's another thing that we have to watch out for, and that's something that requires the hard work and determination and grit of artists. And that's the thing that, when our entire arts communities are on their knees because they don't know how to pay their rent or feed their families, we have to think really hard about where that's going to come from. I think that is, that's a potentially a public crisis. And like all of these things, if you can't appeal to the intrinsic good of it, actually look at the economic good of it. Creative industries and cultural content is a huge export for us if you tie it in with the tourism as well. Obviously there's question marks over that, but we would be really short-sighted as UK PLC to fail to support what is a huge part of our national cultural identity right now, and a huge part and a growing part of our GDP. So for me, I feel like that investment is absolutely crucial. There must be really interesting ways we can do it, going a bit towards the project in terms of how we can structure pulling together public, private, philanthropic capital, again, with real respect to power dynamics, because if you have one powerful organization, obviously you have to be really build in some correction mechanisms to make sure that that doesn't distort what's coming out. But I think that there's, it really is a time to act now. It's an urgent time. I'm sure this is true around the world, but particularly in the UK with Brexit and the threats to our creatives, the idea that creatives are having to retrain in other jobs. These are skills that not only take years to develop, they're also really, it takes a lot of work to keep them going. You can't drop the violin for 3 years because there weren't any gigs and then pick up where you left off. So, I mean, obviously I would never recommend dropping violin anyway, but you can't just stop using these skills. And I think that's the invisible work that artists have been putting in for years, and it's underappreciated. I saw I saw a photo of Boris Johnson with a guitar, and he had his hand behind the capo, and I thought, wow, that is, that's the level maybe of public understanding about how musical instruments work. The amount of skill that people have and work that people put into to get the levels of skill, and the extraordinary content that we all enjoy kind of thoughtlessly. I thought this, you can cut that if you want. I just thought that was an interesting tidbit.
No, yeah, it's a very important, and I'm subscribing completely with you. So I want to touch the new program that you're doing, which I think it's that's the purpose of this interview as well. But I'm quite excited. So you recently created new research and as well a new program that is between Nesta, Fundación Compromiso, and Upstart Collab that launched the Creativity, Culture and Capital, Impact Investing in the Global Creative Economy. And I think that's a very important thing, especially now more than ever. And I want to touch this, and can you elaborate about this program and what is this for people not listening to us? And probably if you could as well elaborate about Fundación Compromiso and Upstart Collab, the partners.
Sure. So and I talk about this in the essay I wrote in the project. One of the real, huge of the many advantages I've the privileges I've enjoyed working at Nesta is the amazing people I get to just call up. It's a bit like my friend Sarah at the Royal Shakespeare Company. You can do just a bit more when you've got that in your email address. So I looked. We were looking online, and I think I actually can't remember how it happened, but Laura Callanan of Upstart Collab and I were contacted each other and had been having regular conversations. She is an absolutely amazing woman. If people want something else to watch, I don't know if you could link to this. She did an interview with Yo-Yo Ma, who's written the afterword for our report, at the Global Steering Group for Impact Investment last September, which was just such a wonderful piece of viewing, really uplifting in a dark time. She has an amazing background. She's extraordinary intellect, and a really just a generally very inspiring person. We've been speaking to her. I've been lucky to speak to her kind of, probably on a 6-monthly basis, checking out where we were, what we were both doing. She set up Upstart Collab. So where I've kind of landed in Nesta and have all the advantage of sitting with an endowment, a pre-packed project ready to go with the Arts Impact Fund when I joined Nesta, Laura has built this all up, from herself, from principles. And she was looking at, so the kind of viewpoint of creativity, culture and capital is really Laura's viewpoint. It's like there's this whole impact investing market that is taking off. We see that in the numbers. It's exploding. We see it's driven by managers, it's driven by clients, it's driven by the change of generation changes in wealth, of concern for the planet, of concerns about moving to a more conscious capitalism model. And Laura looked at that and thought, well, why is that not going into the creative industries? Why is there not a big why isn't that a key area of focus when there is so much good that's done by the creative industries and arts and culture and creative enterprise throughout the world? And she was focused on the US, so her role is harder than mine in that she doesn't have proprietary capital to invest, but she has been, Upstart Collabs have made it their mission to be a real thought leader and advocate and to connect capital. So there's an essay in the collection around LISC, which is a deal that I think Upstart was involved in brokering. But Laura really, does spend a lot of time thinking about this. And we were having these catch-ups and thinking, what is there we can do? She had come to London and met some of the people I knew. So really to, help them benefit from her expertise, but also just to get the lay of the land in the UK. And also through Nesta, I met Carolina Bicard, who at that time was running the National Foundation for the Arts in Argentina. And she was telling me about this amazing model they had in Argentina. So this was a policy point, really, where they had a specific tax on creative industries in order to fund arts and culture and to fund. So really that R&D cycle that I was talking about earlier, that was done in quite a clean way. I think there's something similar now in Colombia, and I found that a really interesting model. Carolina, again, is just such an inspiring and wonderful woman. So really, it's kind of selfishly driven. I thought, what can I do to formalize my connection with these two brilliant women? And then I thought, well, in fact, we should get the three of us together. And we had really I'm quite a non-linear, for a mathematician, certainly not a very methodical person. So I'll just have these ideas. So I got us all on the call, and they were like, right, what's this about? And I sort of went, oh, I mean, I don't know. I just think we should do something together. So Laura, who was a much more methodical and, proper functional adult person, said, well, okay, here's an idea. We've all got networks globally. Why don't we pull together a collection of essays and then we'll publish it? We could publish it with Nesta. You've got the biggest brand. Let's do this as a first step, and then we'll reconvene after that. Of course, I said yes, typically without really appreciating how much work that was going to be for everybody. One of the things I wanted to highlight on this is that it's been it's been such a wonderful collaboration. It's real a real light in the darkness of last year, and I think that it has been it's been exclusively female. Actually, we've had from all of our organisations, we've had only females working on it. I don't want to draw any conclusions because I have an A-level in statistics, and I know that you can't use the sample size of one of my only all-female project, but it has gone really well. And I think that the things that have helped it go well are sort of trust and grace and a lack of ego. And I don't know that I would recommend this. We didn't have any formal agreement, so actually Upstart and Fondest and Compromiso have displayed the most amazing trust in Nesta to do the hours, hundreds of hours of work in kind of thinking about the people we'd like to ask to contribute, asking them to contribute, doing all the admin around the work, and the diplomacy around edits and getting the tone and everything. And while Nesta has sort of held the pen and the checkbook in a certain regard, a lot of the work's been done by those organisations. They placed an awful lot of trust in me and in Nesta, and I'm so grateful to them for that. We've asked, I think we had 44 experts around the world, including ourselves, to contribute to this collection of essays. And what we really wanted to do was demonstrate that creativity and culture are really driving amazing positive social impacts around the world. And we wanted to create, and the reason we wanted this to be a living resource, we wanted it to be a website, we want to do more publications, is that we didn't want to just publish something and say, okay, well, this is the stuff we know about, so there we go, that's done. We really wanted it to be, a center of gravity for pulling in those stories that we haven't heard about. And I think I was reflecting on this earlier, I think one of the challenges working somewhere like Nesta, having this ease of building up a network that lots of people aren't privileged to have, is that you can then feel like, okay, that's done, and then the network becomes a closed loop. And that's something we all really wanted to push against. I know a lot of the people who I come across in my work, in the circles that with the professional circles that we move in, both globally and in the UK, and it was really about making sure that we didn't feel like that was then done just because there is a community. We want that to be a growing community. We want that to be a welcoming community. We want that to be a curated community, so it makes sense. But it's really not about owning it. It's about creating a place for it to flourish. So when people, when I've talked about the website as starting a global conversation, people said, oh, you want the conversation to happen on the website? And yes, to a certain extent, as much as we can, we'd love to build in, discussion forums and audio-visual content and ways for people to connect within the site, which is, a work in progress. But it's really about, making sure that the right voices are involved, and, and that's not our decision, but it's giving voices an opportunity to be involved in all the conversations around this. And the intention is that there will be a global movement. There's a place to go to learn about best practice. Even so, with the Royal Shakespeare Company project that Sarah Ellis has written beautifully about in the collection, we'd love to do a spotlight edition on that. So we're hoping to launch in March a spotlight edition for creativity, culture and capital around the future of live performance. So that's to just host those conversations. What might live performance look like? What does live mean in a digital context? What does that mean for business models, for fixed and variable costs? What are people doing around the world? Is it economically viable for a small organization to do a 360 film or a virtual production? How would they go about that? Are there shared tools? Is there source code that they can access? So really kind of getting into the really digging into underneath the bonnet of that question, and having a place to host that conversation that is also going to be fundamentally about investment and about how the money can go into that, and about how funds should be structured, about who should be paying for the R&D, about how the benefits should be structured, about how we have a more equitable distribution of the benefits of these developments that are happening. So that probably sounds quite a lofty aim, but might as well aim high.
No, that is fantastic, and I think it's critical. I think we need that more than ever. So for people listening to us, where can they find information about this? I know that there's a PR. This was very recent, but can you just tell us where they can find this research, this information, and
Sure,
even
yes.
how to get engaged? Yeah.
Yeah, so we have a website, which is www.creativityculturecapital.org. So what we've done is we've launched with an initial collection of essays, which I think is 36 or 37 essays. You can view those on the browser, or you can download in either English or Spanish. We felt it was really important to challenge, especially because we've had lots of contributors from Latin America, to challenge this kind of presumption of English as the language of communication. We did slightly, you always learn things in these projects. We stupidly asked the Spanish collaborators and contributors to write in English, and then we translated it back into Spanish, so we wouldn't do that next time. But we'd love to, this is I'm pulling together bits of budget from Nesta, but we'd love to work with people on how we could get more languages. We'd love to be able to ask future contributors to write in their own native language and then translate that back to English. It's all about, respect. Another thing we feel really strongly about, we haven't paid contributors who've written essays for the first edition. We would love to be able to do that in future, because obviously that is a boost to inclusion. We're working in the arts where the old exposure argument, you can do this for exposure rather than for money. We don't want to be complicit in that. So we'd love to talk to anyone who could help us fund paying contributors. But really, we just want to hear the stories. We want to publish them. We want to get them heard. So on the website, there is, the hosted online essays that we're trying to grow that collection. We'd hope to get 100 by the end of 2021. And we want to reach the areas we haven't reached. So we've got very little from Asia. We don't have anything from the food industry, for example. There are other areas that are underrepresented. We really want to kind of collect together all of those voices. So on the website, you can sign up for our newsletter. You can indicate interest in contributing. We're not actually launching an open call for the next round of essays yet, because we want to have we want to be able to sort of talk to people about what the process is and how likely it might be to get published. We don't know what the interest levels are yet, so that we're trying to gauge that a little bit before we actually launch a call. But we'd love to communicate with people who are interested in writing essays. For the audience, the Future of Live Performance Spotlight, we're hoping to put some audiovisual content on as well, so potentially curated discussions with the advisory board of the RSC project, and that has, that involves gaming professionals as well. So yeah, if anyone who wants to look, go and have a browse of the website, email us on the specific email address we have. Be as critical as you like. We really want feedback here. We really want you to say, oh, I thought it was going to be this and it's not this. Investors may find that it feels a bit, some of it doesn't feel granular enough, but really that's about the stage of development of this. We're really trying to get a conversation. There are some, genuine investment opportunities in this space, but it's about getting the collective will to develop those further.
Amazing. So we're going to put all these links in the context of the interview, both here on YouTube and other channels that we're doing. So just some of the highlights, I'm looking for some of the things here. So you have a huge amount of contribution from Brazil, Chile, Egypt, Ghana, Kenya, Mexico, and as well a lot of different borders. So one of the questions I have, and I think it's interesting for our audience, is so this is about impact investment and global creative economy. So can you tell, so that you spoke about the way and the genesis of the project and as well how it works, but in terms of impact investment and from your experience as well with funds, so are you working with any funds? Do you have any funds involved on this, or this is right now more behind the sum of the different partners that we have involved? Because I think that's a very important thing, because I see a lot of well, first of all, I think we need to oblige a lot of these funds and creative, well, not just creative, but just funds, to have a sense of social responsibility and ESG, but as well a sense of because one of the challenge I find, being someone that comes actually from an art background and film and music, and then now being much more in technology, is that I feel massive divorce. And I think it's about making bridges. And I think your background is a bridge because you've been bridging all of these different things. But as well, we need to come up with for instance, one of the stigmas that I've been feeling, and it's one of the questions I have for you, is that when I talk with the investment world, of course, there are some people that it's better not to speak with them because they don't have really the part of the medicines and the sensitivity about the creative industries, but a lot of them have. First, I'm working with the project of Ida, the first creative robot that actually is going to be in the Design Museum here in London, and it's a completely private fund project that was funded precisely by multiple investors and different people involved. But I feel that a lot of sometimes is about creating this bridge, but as well understanding that not putting the artists as the subservience of the investors or the mecenas, but making them understand that they have a lot of tools. And I think this is the reason why I created this YouTube podcast series, that it gets me crazy how young people don't understand that these tools, because I think there's kind of two right now observations that I've been finding, and actually my research is that people are using technology and all these digital tools mostly to complain, point one, and point two, to go to conspiracy and fake
Yeah.
news. And they forget how I'm learning every day on YouTube. I'm learning every day how to improve my Facebook, my YouTube, my Twitter. That's a massive amount of work. These numbers that we have and the 4.2 million views that we have right now don't happen because of my budget, because I don't think it's because there's a massive amount of work. So I think this is the part that I feel that this layer of bringing both investors, both creators, and both feeling them that they are as well business. They are every entrepreneur or every artist is an entrepreneur. Is a small startup, and they need to think like that. If they think just that they're going to get money from Nest or from anything else, of course they're going to have a problem, because of course it's difficult. I know as well that you are in a very sensitive problem, because you have to get the money, make the bridge, and teach the people. And I think it's like the Chinese proverb: give a bit of give a fish, don't or teach how to fish, don't give a fish, like they say. But well, I want to touch this part of the special impact investment, and if you are creating like bridges, because really I feel the education and the component of for instance, I've been teaching for 15 years in business schools, and I really am alarmed by the lack of digital knowledge of my students. Not that they spend like 10 hours in front of devices, everyone spends now. And if someone tells not, they lie. But the point is that, well, how much creativity are you doing out of that? How much productivity are you doing? And this is kind of, for me, the part that is missing in all these bridges and all these impact parts, because there's, for instance, I've been advising countries, for instance, Malaysian government, Create Malaysia 5.0, that is precisely about some of these things. And I found out that the reason I did it all pro bono, so I was not paid, which is kind of a bit tricky, but that's the fact. But the point that I've been finding is the lack of knowledge of using digital. Even the people that are, I'm sure they are using Twitter, Facebook, and everything else. So I want to touch this part and the impact investor, because as well, a lot of funds and investment groups, and even for instance, if you look right now, there's the new massive the Clubhouse, which is the new app that is becoming like the new $1 billion unicorn. It's mostly about sound and groups where people discuss like we're doing here. So it's creative industries in the end of the day, and all of it's just put $200 million there. So the money exists. It's just probably being channeled to the wrong places, and I think this is, for me, what I would like to bridge with these conversations and with people like you that have as well quite a lot of knowledge.
Yeah, I think you've really touched on the reason I'm passionate about this job, and the reason so when I started with the Arts Impact Fund, I felt a bit cautious about, we had Arts Council England money, the arts sector was used to grants, and we were going out with loans. And, lots of my friends who are artists like, oh, well, I don't want to have to pay it back. I prefer the free money. And to me, it's completely about a mindset shift. So we had an organization who came to us and said, the reason that we want to take on a loan is we want to be able to think beyond the next 3-year funding cycle. We want to be able to generate our own income. We want to be, I've had other organizations who've said that losing a big grant is the best thing that's ever happened to them in terms of resilience. And of course, I'm 100% behind grant finance. We absolutely need grants, as I've talked about. But if you only have grants, then that does develop a certain mindset. And I think that moving away from specific project finance, and I mean that in terms of grants and R&D, and a lot of artists will have had the view that you get the money, you put something on, that's done, you move on, and that's partly an artist mentality, and that's partly the way artists develop. But that does mean that you have this, particularly there's a sort of digital graveyard of assets that organizations have made and then they don't utilize, because that's not been the way of the arts. You've moved on to the next thing, and I believe that's anti-enterprising, really. I think that that's not an enterprise mindset. That's not something you can sort of have the luxury of doing if you have equity investors on your back, for example. So I think it's about balancing that risk, and I do think that's and I've talked about that in terms of organizations, but I think it's absolutely true in terms of individuals as well. And it's really about just being savvy, using your time wisely. And I think I find that fascinating, that there's people will talk about screen time for their teenagers, and that could mean anything. They could be teaching themselves Python, they could be working out, or they could be winning £1 million on Fortnite, they could be, my children do so much of their musical learning just watching YouTube. And so screen time is this extraordinary spectrum of things where actually you could teach yourself anything in the world. You could probably pass most degrees now from YouTube. And I think it's a really important question for education, of course, of formal education and skills, but it's also a really important question for people who are trying to buy services and who are trying to commission things, because you've had this way, which has been a shortcut for many years, like, I'll go for someone who's got qualification in this. But of course, we always look at the proof and the concept. So you'd want to look at, in the arts as well, you'd want to look at someone's portfolio and someone's track record. So thinking about how we can use that in a shifting employment market. So what are the ways that these informally educated but highly skilled individuals can market themselves? And that's another level of skills. You've got to get the marketing skills, but you've also got to have the reception for that on the other side. So you've got to have commissioning frameworks within commissioners which enable that, and which aren't just too lazy, and I don't think, I know that in some cases that's pure pragmatics, and it's just, you do have to have some kind of shortcut in terms of how you pay for services. But in some those frameworks aren't fit for purpose, and they're just there because they're there. So I think a whole reimagining of that will encourage, and this probably sounds a bit abstract, but to me that's all part of the same thing. That's building the plumbing, that's building an ecosystem for things to get made. So it's the same question, really, fundamentally and philosophically, as working out what's the right balance and the right structure for risk subsidy versus investment capital. What's the right balance? How do we, and it's all about incentives and creating strong incentives that are that's not distributive, it's not zero sum, it works best for everybody. And it's about creating that alignment and optimizing along the right axes, I suppose, if we're going to use investment terminology.
Yeah, and I think that the language is very important. I think I will just give a small example of my career. When I started my career, I was quite young, and I started a bit like you in my 20s. My first cultural organization, actually, between Portugal and France. And actually, this was a time in Portugal, there were quite a lot of cultural, it was the first European Union. So I had quite substantial funding, and suddenly there was a change in the ministry, and I lost all my business. And I said business because I was a small entrepreneur in culture. And that made me change all my business model from that one that I never came back to the culture. I'm talking from that level, but it really made me change, but made me change as well that you need to be more independent. And I see, if you see some of the organizations in culture that are very successful, they are as well thinking on the two layers. Of course, it's difficult if you are an artist of visual arts or music or whatever, that you cannot be an entrepreneur and do the two things. But I think if we get this kind of mentality to use these tools in our sense of providing solutions, we can make a lot of difference. So I know that we passed already 1 hour and something, so I will be wrapping up because it's been fantastic and I still have a lot of questions, but I'll be just touching 2 more questions. So I think especially I want to touch the ESG at large. And I know because you have the experience both from an investment perspective now within, of course, the biggest innovation foundation in the UK. How do you bridge this? Because in the end of the day, there's effectively billions and billions of dollars that are being invested. Some of them is very bad invested because unfortunately we see a lot of disparity in the world, and especially COVID has been just alarming on that. So I want to touch this. How do you see ESG investment, especially in the bridges with creative industries?
Well, it's really, yeah, it's a really an interesting and challenging question. Obviously, you know, it's not as simple. There aren't simple answers, and I think that, you know, I will speak to people who have large foundations, and I think actually the foundation space, the endowment space, is a good prism to view it through, because they obviously are wanting to maximize returns so they can invest in their grant programs, but they're also wanting to be invested alongside, you know. So if you have a big foundation that's focused on health, but they've made 20 million more that year in tobacco stocks than they would have made in I'm trying to think of an ethical industry now. You know,
I understand it's not easy.
yeah. Well, so say they've done positive venture investing, and obviously you've got different questions around there with risk profile, liquidity, all that kind of thing. So all these things that endowments are balancing, which aren't necessarily things that the general public are going to understand completely, because it is quite complicated. There's a you know, there's a genuine question there. Is that the right choice? And I think it's right to interrogate where your cost, do your cost benefit analysis. And it's very, you know, I would land on, yes, you should get out of this in stocks. No, you shouldn't be investing in tobacco. But it's an important question for investment committees to actually really be able to interrogate strongly, to work out what their mission is, how they create the best outcomes for the people that they're trying to serve. So I think that's why endowments are an interesting prism for it. I think that the ESG, you know, I'm obviously, but as I said earlier, from my time at JP Morgan, I think anything that can use the power of, there's a wonderful organization called ShareAction in the UK, run by a brilliant organization called Catherine Howarth, I think. She so they are, you know, a activist shareholder, so they're using the power of big shareholders to affect positive change in corporate governance and corporate activity, and I think that's really fascinating. So, you know, this is a huge force in the world, in global capitalism, and being able to move the needle very slightly makes a huge difference. So if you can change the policy of, but then if you can change the policy of a big organization, and if you can convince them that their shareholders care more about environmental benefit, for example, than profit, and that, you know, there've been lots of policy shifts forwards as well in terms of how organizations are enabled to think about shareholder value and how they're allowed to manage themselves, what the key principles of governance are. There's also obviously policy environments that can be more or less supportive to ESG concerns. Yeah, on balance, I'm hugely supportive. I think that I think that it's encouraging individuals to understand where their assets might be working, so what they might be doing with pensions that they don't really think about, what that might be enabling. And so it's much more about, again, redistributing a balance of power and creating the plumbing for that to be possible. I think impact investment, so it's interesting. I think there is a language challenge. When I started off in Big Society Capital, you know, social investment, as we talked about it then in the UK, was much more about very specific social impact bonds, you know, really granular social outcomes that were directly traceable back or attributable to the capital. That is, you know, that's not going to become a huge market extremely quickly or quickly enough to absorb the wave of capital that's coming in. So of course there has to be a bit of loosening of that, but loosening of that definition. But at the same time, you know, it can allow dilution. So it's thinking about what those forces are. What's the best way to capture the will of the sort of force of positive capital, and to shepherd it into genuine opportunities, rather than you know, what is the right balance of those large volume small changes and those small volume large changes, and who are the custodians who can help to guide and manage that, whether that's policymakers or huge investors, or vocal people like Paul Polman. And in the sorry, you were talking about I want to go back to your creatives and polars, excuse me. And you know, this characterization is like what I was saying earlier about my identity. For people to write off all bankers as one-dimensional individuals is very much you know, it's a very reductive view that undersells the complicated beauty of the world, I think. So it's very worth recognizing that and having nuanced conversations. And you know, there's a lot of really genuine enthusiasm from all parties about a move to a more positive and multidimensional investment model, and a move to a more conscious capitalism that, you know, in the long term benefits all of us, as we see most pointedly in the climate crisis.
Yeah, completely. So in question of time and to respect your time. So although I have this is really very exciting, and especially I have a lot of input, and actually I welcome the project that you did, and congratulations, because I know that is not easy to get all these different organizations, and especially it's very easy to criticize, it's difficult to build. I always tell that to everyone, especially to my children, but as well to my team. Okay, if you are stuck in the problem, you're part of the problem. You have to get out of the problem and think about the solution. That's what I said to everyone. So my last question is a bit of wrap up. So we are amid COVID-19, which is in one end probably the biggest destruction of finance and economy in the last, probably in the UK, I think it is the last 300 years. But of course, since Second World War at least. And this has a lot of impact, both economical, mental, social, and of course, it's not just for the arts, it's actually everyone. There's in the US, there's 40 million people that are really in the edge of poverty, and this is the US, and it's getting in the UK. Of course, we have this kind of very frightening numbers, especially when it comes to deaths. So I think we are one of the worst in terms of death ratio, but we have as well the vaccination. Let's focus on the positive. But my question is, so COVID-19 has been definitely, if you look at all the negative, I think everyone knows, but the positive is that it's been accelerating the digital capacity. And I think everyone right now understands they cannot just play around with the digital. And I'm not saying the digital to stay hours in front of devices, but using digital to business. For our interview right now, that probably, if it wasn't for COVID, probably I would be doing face-to-face, or would be more complex even to get our agendas to match. But at the same time, there's a lot of things that are more fluid. And I think in the end of the day, a lot of people have a lot of opportunities. So I would like to ask, because I think especially knowing about Nesta experience and history of doing fantastic work, and it's always easy to look at the negative part, but there's fantastic things that I think everyone understands that, and all the bridges, especially of background. So how can we maximize this economic and social impact, especially on culture, and support the creative economy out of this? And I think that's probably the question that you're asking as well in this project that you've been leading. But I would like to see and try to urge you as well to think, because what I've tried to do with this channel is that although I'm an academic and with a lot of books published and teaching universities, one of the things I try go down to earth and understand the problems and solve the problems, because you need to look at the root of the problems instead of just and of course everything that I'm trying to do, I've been much more focused right now and really concrete examples. So I would like to look, because definitely I mean, for instance, right now I just opened the website. We have fantastic global people there. There are some fantastic researchers, people from different things, and I work with a lot of investment organizations, and I know that there's a lot of sensibility for this, but sometimes it's about creating a wave and making sure that we surf it right, and as well making sure that we get that wave to have a lot of noise, because the noise is important, the digital component is important, because people look at that first of all. And sometimes it's not just about the money. And if you look at, for instance, Gates Foundation has been putting billions of dollars to nurture a lot of social impact and ESG and so forth. There's a lot of other foundations, but at the same time, there's a lot of companies creating that are social impact driven companies that are really doing, for instance, crowdfunding. There's a lot of different things. And a lot of these things is making sure that all these organizations talk with each other. Because what I feel is that there's amazing work, but very lack of coordination. And I think that's what you're trying to do. So I would like just to finish in a positive note. How do you see that bridge? And as well, you touch about how you just join different people, same different things, even without having money, just getting people. It's like me, I'm doing a lot of things without money, including work with governments, because I know that the money will come, but you need to think about the values as well, the practicality of this. So I would like to hear that experience, and of course your wealth of experience, because you work with charities, with investment banks, and now with Nest and with all these things. How do you see COVID-19 and as well practical things we can actually act, and especially for the artists and organizations listen to us right now?
Yeah, I think it's all about having those conversations, about sharing knowledge, about listening, really genuinely listening. You know, you said earlier it has been easier sometimes to get meetings with people, and I think it's working out how that doesn't exclude, you know, that doesn't again create a closed loop of network, like I was talking about earlier. So I think it's creating those places to share knowledge, creating supportive environments for knowledge sharing, like you say, which feel less critical, or where people are feeling not open or not subject to criticism. I don't know the answer. I mean, that's part of the thing that we're trying to create, right? Is somewhere to have a conversation, somewhere to host information and knowledge sharing. And I think, yeah, exactly, the, you know, digital content creation is a really good example of that. Where does somebody go who is a small theatre company, or who, and you know, the arts is such a wonderful sector for this, because there's so much of this, there's always been so much sharing, there's really very little sort of protectionism, and I think that's driven probably by people's love for what they're doing and love for what they create, and the kind of passion that that drives the arts and creativity. Again, that's, you know, that it would be great if the big platforms would host some of this stuff, given that they're benefiting from it. So, for example, if they could give toolkits for frugal content creation for small organizations, but I can't see that that's going to be, you know, it's probably not going to please their shareholders if they're creating competition for themselves. So we've kind of gone right back to the question. I think it is all about, it's about knowledge sharing. It's about being open where you can. It's about thinking about whether you need to guard the skills that you have, whether you really need to be protective about that, or whether you can share it, and how you get it on a platform where you can share it with the most people. So, you know, exactly what you're trying to do and what I'm trying to do, it's create places for people to find knowledge that will help them, and to, you know, enable this to be collective enterprise and collective intelligence, and everyone standing on each other's shoulders, although that sounds a bit perilous, but you know what I mean, building foundations together.
Completely. And I thank you for all this sharing of knowledge. That's we've been 1 hour and a half. So I have probably one note that I'll leave for you and our audience, especially the people from the arts, is that, for instance, I was actually with one of the people in my team. There was this big event of arts. It was art, fintech, and blockchain. And the irony is that it was one of the first art events that I have in my career, and in 20 years, that I got actually a couple of billionaires speaking with artists. And I'm talking about some, and the Whitney Museum of Art and stuff like that. So I think there's a lot of I would say that this is like small rivers, but we need to put it in the ocean.
Yeah.
that are flowing together, but they're not really getting. So I think definitely, I think your platform is really a fantastic ecosystem. That I think, especially, I'm a huge fan of platforms that where you can actually aggregate people. And these platforms, I think that's a good thing about technology if you use it for good. is that you can create a decentralized Facebook, and people are not still understanding that it's not so difficult. It's more about the initiative to follow up on that. And if you look at crowdfunding platforms, blockchain, there's a huge amount of right now crypto art. So I would suggest that it's more the way we put as well the tools and the technology to serve these different things. And I welcome to everyone listening to us, of course, to go to your platform, and they're going to put all the links. But definitely, I urge everyone as well to think out of the box and look at these tools as well.
Yeah, so, I'd love to talk to you about that. I mean, I've you know, over the course of my life, I've benefited so much from online communities, and always when I'm doing anything online, I'm like, how do we create a community around this? So that's something we'd really like to do.
No, definitely, and count on me. Actually, that is one of my areas of expertise. Perfect. But I want to thank you, Francesca. It's been I have much more questions, but I think in the sake of time, we'll go into this, and we're going to promote the initiative. And actually, there's a couple of people as well that will suggest for essays all over the world. I've been working.
Yeah, fantastic. We really, you know, we just want to amplify as many voices as we can.
Oh, thank you so much. I think just as a note for the people listening to us, so the project that Francesca is leading, of course, Nesta, that is a very well-known foundation innovation in the UK, but the project that I think I urge everyone to look, and I will just repeat, is the Creativity, Culture and Capital, Impact Investment in the Global Creativity Economy, which is a fantastic platform of contribution from the likes of Sir Ronald Cohen, Yo-Yo Ma, Sir Nicholas Serota, and as well a lot of other people from Royal Shakespeare Company, Sarah Ellis, a lot of other people involved. So congratulations for that initiative. I think we need positive and more, and count on me to help. And thank you for your time as well today. It's fantastic.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you, Denise.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.